Hello, everyone. It is great to see you. So glad to see some of you in this room and know that many of you are with us online. And we're just glad that every single one of you is choosing to worship with us today. A few decades ago, if you were tagged the GOAT, it meant that you were the employee or you were the leader or the player who was responsible for a failure, who was responsible for a loss. But that meaning has been turned on its head. And GOAT is now an acronym for a very sought-after designation. Do you know what it means? The greatest of all time. If you've read or listened to sports commentary in recent years, you know that GOAT means greatest of all time. But even if you don't follow sports, you likely have an opinion about who deserves the GOAT designation in some realm. Whether the topic is athletes or actors or artists or leaders, we are mesmerized by greatness, and we love to debate who actually is the greatest of all time. I cannot hear the phrase, the greatest, without thinking of boxer Muhammad Ali, who loved to say, "I am the greatest." Now, boxing fans debate whether that was actually true, but there is no question Muhammad Ali was the greatest self-promoter of all time. Early in his career, a lot of people were put off by Ali's bragging and trash talk, but over time, most were eventually won over by his talent and by his charisma. Before his first victory over boxer Sonny Liston, Ali said, "I am the greatest. 15 times I've told the clown what round he's going down, and this chump ain't no different. He'll fall in 8 to prove that I'm great. And if he keeps talking jive, I'm going to cut it to 5. In 1993, Ali's wife Lonnie established GOAT Incorporated to control and to monetize her husband's image and intellectual property. And as far as I can tell, that's where our modern use of the GOAT acronym originated. But as entertaining as characters like Muhammad Ali can be, and as passionate as we can be when debating who is the greatest in one realm or another, it would be a mistake to allow our concept of greatness to be shaped by celebrities and commentators. We need a higher authority, and we need a fuller perspective, and that's why we're going to spend the next few weeks discussing how God defines greatness. This obsession that we have with greatness, it did not begin with us. In Matthew 18:1, we read, "About that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' Hey, Jesus, who's the GOAT? Who's the greatest?" And even though Jesus could have said, "I'm really glad you asked because I am the greatest. I actually am the greatest of all time, the greatest of the greats," Jesus understood that the disciples were not asking about theology or about his identity. He realized they were asking about themselves, about the followers of Jesus. Which one of them did Jesus consider to be the greatest? Who would emerge as Jesus' right-hand man? Now, we ask questions to build relationships with others or to gain understanding from others, but we often fail to realize that the questions we ask are always revealing things about us. People are always analyzing what's behind that question. When I'm interviewing someone for a job here at Westside, I ask questions, as you would expect. But I will often turn the tables and say, "Is there anything you'd like to ask me?" And I pay attention to the kind of questions people ask of me. You know who asks great questions? Kids ask great questions. One kid asked his mom why mattress companies put a design on the mattress when they know it's going to be covered by a sheet. That's a good question. Another child asked why spiders don't get stuck in their own webs. Brilliant question. Comedian Jim Gaffigan said his 3-year-old asked, "Why did New York City name a skyscraper the Empire State Building?" Good question. While watching Star Wars, a little boy asked his dad why they didn't name the Death Star the Shooting Star. And his dad admitted that there was no good reason for George Lucas to have missed that opportunity. If you're a parent, you know it's important to pay attention to your child's questions. Because if your child asks, "Where do we keep the hammer?" you don't just answer the question. You dig into what is prompting that question, because 10 out of 10 times kids want a hammer, you don't want them to have it. If your child asks if kids can fly, you know you need to have a little talk about gravity and the dangers that gravity can pose. And when the followers of Jesus asked him, "Who's the greatest?" Jesus could see through their question. He knew they weren't looking for an opportunity to congratulate someone else on being great. Jesus had recently allowed Peter to walk on water, and Peter had been part of some other prominent miracles. So I wonder if some of the disciples were feeling jealous of Peter and wondering if he was becoming greater than them. Jesus realized that rivalry and glory seeking was growing in the hearts of his closest followers. And that's why Jesus responded so wisely and so intentionally to their question about who was greatest among them. Do you remember what Jesus did next? Look at verse 2 of Matthew 18. Jesus called a little child to him, and he put the child among them, and then he said, "I tell you the truth, unless you turn from your sins and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven." So anyone who becomes as humble as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Who is the greatest in God's kingdom? The one who is humble. The greatest person is the person who isn't obsessed with becoming great. While visiting California to check on a new restaurant, the CEO of a fast food chain invited the pastor to tour a construction site. And the preacher said yes and met the CEO for a tour. And when they finished looking around, they were hungry. And since the new restaurant was not yet open, they walked next door to a Taco Bell. Before eating, they went to the restroom and washed up. But when the pastor stepped out of the restroom, he noticed his friend, the CEO, did not follow him immediately. And when he reopened the restroom door to check on his friend, he saw the CEO of a competing restaurant chain wiping down the sink and the fixtures with paper towels. No quality is more attractive, more compelling, more influential than humility. But no vice is more difficult to resist than pride. We're all told, especially in the year 2020, we need to build our platforms. We need to promote our personal brands. We need to increase our followers, increase our influence. I received a spam message on social media a few days ago that offered me 10,000 new followers on social media for a price. And I suppose those ads work at times, not because the followers are authentic, but because the idea of people seeing that we have a large number of followers on our social media accounts appeals to our pride. But the Bible says God hates pride. And that language is so strong that some people are surprised by it. I suspect God hates pride because pride is the primary obstacle between so many of us and God. It's the thing that keeps people from being submissive and surrendering to God. Proverbs 6:16 says, "There are 6 things the Lord actually hates. No, 7 things he detests. And the very first one in the list, haughty eyes." Pride. My former assistant, Sally, is a cancer survivor, so she's always had deep compassion for any West Sider who has been diagnosed with cancer. And when she would send me an email to inform me of someone who contracted cancer, she would often say at the end of her email, "I hate cancer." And I would agree. Cancer took my dad when I was 27 before he had a chance to meet my kids. Now look, we have a hope that is greater than cancer, but I still hate cancer and other diseases that take so much from people. And look, that's the sense in which God hates pride. Because pride destroys so much spiritual potential. It ruins so many relationships. It sidetracks so many churches. It divides so many families. And God hates seeing the impact, the consequences of pride in our lives. So when the disciples of Jesus asked him, "Who is the greatest among your followers?" Jesus perceived that there was pride behind their question. And he addressed it directly because he hated to think what unchecked pride might do to them. And he loved imagining what they could achieve together if they were filled with humility instead of pride. Pride is a character disease, and like most diseases, it has symptoms. And if we're self-aware, if we're honest, we can actually diagnose pride in our own lives. Do you know what to look for in your life to determine whether or not pride is beginning to take up too much space in your heart? One symptom of pride is defensiveness. Defensiveness is feeling accused and offended and attacked the moment someone disagrees with us or suggests something to us or challenges us in a way that's intended to be helpful to us. Defensiveness asks, "How dare you?" And I suppose I listed this one first because my wife hacked my sermon notes. A father was driving his 8-year-old son named Jack to school when Jack asked, "Dad, do you believe in the Bermuda Triangle?" His dad answered, "Well, Jack, I believe there is a place that is known as the Bermuda Triangle, but if you're asking me if I believe whether or not there's a mysterious force in that part of the ocean that causes planes and ships to disappear for no other reason, no, I don't believe in the legends about the Bermuda Triangle in that way." From the back seat, Jack replied defensively, "Well, I believe in it, and I don't know why you wouldn't believe in it." And when Jack's dad asked him what happened to cause him to believe in the Bermuda Triangle, his son replied, "Well, I was watching Scooby-Doo." The more humility we develop, the less defensive we are when someone disagrees with us. And rather than being threatened by disagreement or constructive feedback, we will require ourselves to consider it. Humility always has opened the possibility, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe my understanding isn't full enough. And when a person is humble, he or she might even embrace that kind of input. Proverbs 15:31 says, "If you listen to constructive criticism, you will be at home among the wise." I have a feeling that's not a very crowded home, don't you? Now, Solomon wrote those words. In another passage, Solomon wrote, "Better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool." You see, even when you and I are headed in the wrong direction in life, we can always find people who will applaud where we are going, who will applaud our selfish thinking, who will agree with foolish ideas. Another version of that verse reads, "It's better to heed a wise man's rebuke than listen to the song of fools." You know where the song of fools is always playing? On your social media. There is someone listening to me today who is allowing fools to serenade you with that song. And if you've decided that you like that song, it can change your life in all the wrong ways. If you run from the voices that lovingly offer correction and you run toward the voices that foolishly agree with your impulses, it may be because you lack humility. Another symptom of pride is constant criticism. Proud people are often hypercritical people. When we are proud, we see flaws, many flaws, in everyone else. Every restaurant has poor service. Every supervisor at work is ignorant. Every coach is inept. Every driver on the road is an idiot. Every worship service misses the mark in some way. Every politician is corrupt. But humble people resist complaining, and humble people emphasize what is good. Proud people magnify and exaggerate what's wrong. Philippians 4:8 says, "Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise." If you don't think pride and criticism are connected in some way, visit the comment section of any blog or read the comments that follow a political post on social media. On second thought, don't read the comments that follow political posts on social media. Avoid those things. Separate yourself from proud people, from fussy people. And if you're that person, my eloquent advice is stop it. An author tells the story of going to his mother's hairdresser for a haircut, and then later telling his mom, "Mom, I think your hairstylist has some genuine interest in spiritual things. You should talk to her about Jesus." And his mother replied, "I've been going to her for years. Believe me, she is not interested in God." So the man said, "Mom, will you just pray about it before your next appointment with her?" So before the next appointment, his mom prayed, but not very enthusiastically. And then during her next appointment, she was trying to decide if she was going to mention a spiritual topic, but before she did, her stylist said, "Your son said you're part of a Bible study. Do you mind if I go with you sometime?" Friend, we are so programmed to expect negativity and to expect resistance from people, we forget that God is still at work in people's lives and that He is still mighty to save. He still saves people who are far from Him. And the fact that we don't expect it is really a form of pride. It's a lack of humility. It's a lack of deference and recognition that God is great and our great God still saves people. That's why we don't invite people to church. That's why we're so reluctant to speak of spiritual things. I know our culture is trying to train us not to do those things, but sometimes it's our pride that accepts that training and agrees not to speak up. A third symptom of pride is ingratitude. And here's how that works. Pride makes us think that we deserve more and better than we currently have. We deserve to be treated better. We deserve to have better things. We deserve more visibility and more influence. We deserve more respect than what people give us. And every self-help podcaster and author is telling us that we are not here to serve the world. We are here to run the world. So because we lack the humility to realize we're being played by those people and those messages, we're being misled, we become resentful of our lives, we become dissatisfied with the blessings that we have, and we miss the opportunities that God has placed in front of us to serve others. A fourth indicator that we lack humility is jealousy. Jealousy asks, why does that person have more than me? But a jealous person usually can't cope with a candid answer to that question. Competition can be healthy to a point, but jealousy is unhealthy rivalry. It's more about the heart than it really is about opportunity. Jealousy doesn't rejoice with those who rejoice, as the Bible teaches us. Instead, it only superficially celebrates others while inwardly resenting others. During college, my wife traveled on a summer team with another student who seemed meek and kind externally. But as the summer wore on, some twisted thoughts came to the surface in her attitudes and her words. Jealousy seeks to diminish others, but it only diminishes the jealous person in the long run. A fifth symptom of pride is insecurity. Now, from a distance, insecurity can look a lot like humility or modesty. But up close, it's not the same thing at all. Insecurity can have multiple causes, and some of them are deep, and some of them can be beyond a person's control. But sometimes insecurity is simply pride masquerading as modesty. Friend, if you study history, or you observe people closely, or if you're truly aware of yourself, you know genuine humility is really elusive. I would be tempted to say that it's beyond our reach, if not for one thing, one person actually, Jesus. Let these words, this description of Jesus, sink into your spirit, because this is the one you and I follow. Philippians 2:6 says of him, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave. He humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Jesus is King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He is also the epitome of humility. He was meek and lowly of heart. Teddy Roosevelt was a noteworthy president, but after he died, one of his children, who knew his personality well, said, "My father loved attention. He wanted to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral." Contrast that to Nick Wallenda. You might remember Nick, or you at least remember some of the things that he has done, even if you don't recognize his name. In 2012, Nick walked a tightrope across Niagara Falls. The following year, he became the first person to high-wire walk the Grand Canyon. And that's only some of the amazing stuff that Nick has done. He holds nearly a dozen Guinness Book World Records. Very accomplished. Nick is also a follower of Jesus. And he's concerned not just about his accomplishments, but about his character. So after these events where he does these amazing things, it would be easy for Nick to thump his chest and to celebrate himself and to go treat himself to some refreshment and luxury. But instead, Nick walks the grounds where the crowds have gathered to watch him perform, and he picks up trash. The star of the show picks up sticky cups and used candy wrappers. And when asked about it, Nick said, "I found that 3 hours of cleaning up debris is good for my soul, because humility does not come naturally to me. I have to force myself into situations that are humbling. As a follower of Jesus, I see him washing the feet of others," Nick said. "And if I don't intentionally serve other people, then I'll only serve my own ego." That's the kind of self-awareness that you and I need. Nick's words remind me of James chapter 4. And there are 2 verses in chapter 4 of James. I think it's verse 7 and verse 10, where James uses the phrase, "humble yourself." Now, most of us can recall a time when someone else humbled us. We all have some of those stories, don't we? Or we might even believe that God stepped in and humbled us at some point, or circumstances humbled us. And some of us have even claimed that we've been truly humbled by compliments and awards and accomplishments. But what does James say? He says, and this is genius, humble yourself. Don't wait for someone else to humble you. Don't wait for life to humble you. Don't wait for the consequences of a pandemic to humble you. Don't require God to step in and humble you. And don't pretend that humility is acting sheepish when your success is celebrated. Instead, you humble you. And I should humble me. If we humble ourselves, then we can remain humble and we can grow in humility. So let me ask you a specific question. What have you done since last Sunday when we gathered, to humble yourself. Nick Walenda uses the phrase, if I don't humble myself, it will trip me up. That is an ironic metaphor for a guy who walks a tightrope for a living. But it's a good picture of what's at stake if we don't humble ourselves. And what are you going to do later today or in the days just ahead as you go to work, as you live in your home with other people? What will you do to humble yourself? If true greatness is humility, and if we can all humble ourselves, then guess what that means? It means that we can all develop the quality that among all qualities is the greatest of all time.